What's going on, golf fans? It's your boy GS Luke here with our round 3 live stream for the Zurich Classic. Going to get you ready for the best ball format tomorrow. All your lineups, any questions that you have down there in the chat, as well as the weather report, some of the contests over there at DraftKings. We even put it all together by building a lineup or two together. But hopefully your Friday is treating you guys nicely. You're ready for this weekend golf over here at the Zurich. We got some live golf, which is actually finishing up right now, which I would say is probably the main event I've been focusing on for this week, which pretty sick golf course up there in Mexico City. So if you haven't already seen that, you might want to check it out yourself. But I see we already got Robert Michael already down there in the chat. And look at that. Robert had a takedown today. It looks like he had a whole 10K cash over there in the big 333. Says that he used the game theory edge, also went with some morning guys in the ownership over there on my site. Exactly what we talked about, and it's good to see that you turned that into a 10K cash. So hopefully it treated everyone out there nicely. You got Michael Rice down there as well, who says that hopefully everyone's having a good week. I'm having an okay week out there with my 150 max exposure. Only went with 60 lineups, so not quite a full 150 max. A few 6 of 6 runners that are going to have a chance. But one of my big single entries for this week is a 6 of 6 lineup, and it's looking pretty sweet heading into best ball tomorrow. So I'm pretty stoked heading into the weekend, excited out here for the round 3 exposure. So any questions, you can feel free to go ahead and let me know down in the chat. And even if you don't have any and you just want to go out there and say hi, that is, of course, acceptable as well. But the one thing I do need you to do is go out there and smash a like button if you haven't already, and also to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the content to come, which of course will include our round 4 live stream tomorrow. We're saying, are the Steelers going to take Sanders in round 2? They don't have anyone or pick in round 2, so they'd have to trade up to go out there and take them, but we'll have to see. I would say that there's slim to no chance if he's going to get taken early in the second round that they'd play him. But if he falls to like the end of the second or God forbid the third round, there's a chance that they'd go out there and play him, especially with how much Tomlin's talked him up. So we'll see. I'm going to have a side eye on that. Hopefully get off the live stream before any of that kind of stuff goes down. But I don't know my opinion on him. I think he's a great talent. The leadership ability, at least from what I've heard, is really good from some of his teammates. I just got to wonder why he's slipping down these draft boards, right? Usually there's a reason that you hear about after the fact for a player not getting picked as early as you'd expect. And I'm kind of interested to see what it is with Sanders. And you said, if you're not minus 12 or better going into the weekend, you're cooked, might be walking the course again tomorrow. I'd say anyone that made the cut's okay, Tim, because your leader's there at minus 17, right? And your cut's there at minus 10. So respectfully, and not sure I agree with that. So I think it'd be a good spot to be there at minus 12 or better. But if you have guys that made the cut, especially with a sub 1% 6 of 6 rate in a lot of contests, you're going to be pretty decent heading into the weekend. So respectfully disagree, but let's talk about what we have for tomorrow. So I like to focus on the weather first off, which looks pretty flat for the most part. Unlike today, where it did kind of strengthen with the wind as the day went on, it looks like it's going to be essentially the same all day. You're talking about maybe a 2-3 mile an hour difference from the late morning to the early afternoon. The very end of the day, so you're talking like 5-6 p.m. local time, it's getting closer to like 10 miles an hour sustained, but most of the play is going to be done by then. Only your last few groups, so even on the golf course, would be get hit by that sort of thing. And what I understand is that this is kind of a thunderstorm that might pop up in the late afternoon. So there's a chance, we haven't gone to tee times over there from the PGA Tour yet, that if this is a pop-up thunderstorm that they're calling for around 5 p.m., that they send them off of both 1 and 10, even on this kind of format, just because of the possibility of a delay. Now, I'm not 100% sure if the latest models are going to be calling for that kind of a storm, but it's at least something I want to throw out there right now because we don't have those tee times quite yet. But assuming that it is going to be just 2 groups going off of hole number 1, which is still going to be only like 18 groups that are going off total. So about like 4 hours of tee times at the most that you're going to have from the first to last tee time. But if they're going to do it off of holes 1 and 10, I mean, you're talking about a 2-hour max difference between the first and last tee time. So that would take away any sort of weather edge that you have out there. But if they are starting just off of hole number 1, then maybe you could take some of the earliest few groups out and hope that maybe they're getting a little bit of a softer golf course compared to those last few groups. And if they are teeing off around, I'm assuming the last few groups are going to be going off around noon. That's usually when they try and get these team events off for your last group. And they're going to avoid most of that wind, but maybe they are going off a little bit later than I expect. Those last few groups could get hit with wind for their last hour and a half, 2 hours of play, whereas that morning wave could also have no wind and soft conditions. So kind of like yesterday, it's more of a lean than anything. I wouldn't go all in on the weather in one direction or the other, but if you're going to go out there and break a tie, everything was 50-50 on a player, that sort of thing. I think if you had a guy going off in the first three groups compared to a player going off very late, then it makes that decision really easy. Now, if it's a guy going off first in the first three groups compared to a guy going off in like the third or fourth group out, then I don't think it's really a big deal at all, right? That sort of difference between those two players. So you've got to be careful when you're looking at the weather to not lean into it too much, and really to only use it when you have to out there in your process. So it's more so going to be a game theory slate. We're going to have a few different ideas for going out there and finding your player pool. But just like round two showdown, no one really knows what to do out here in this team format, especially when it's best ball, which is so different than what we're used to out here on tour. I mean, alternate shots, at least kind of like a regular tour event. You know, your scoring is going to be what you normally have around a TPC Louisiana, whereas tomorrow, when you're not going to have nearly as many bogeys, guys shooting sub 60 rounds out there on tour, it's not going to be anything like what we're used to seeing out here. So you got to kind of got to throw like everything you know to the wayside. Know that there's going to be a lot of chaos, a lot of unpredictable stuff that happens for tomorrow, and play against the rest of the field. So, you know, as you were saying over there with Robert's comment before, right, getting good ownership projections like you have on my site over there on the SHIPIT Nation site as well, right? Shout out to them. All the great work that they're doing over there for Showdown this week as well. I saw that they had projections posted on their website on top of what I'm posting on my Patreon page. But having those sort of projections is key on a day like this, because that is the biggest edge that we have, right? We're going to talk about a few ideas with birdie percentage stats they can go out there and use for your analysis, but that's not the end all be all, right? Just like this weather isn't the end all be all. The main end all be all for you out there for tomorrow, really, I think if there's anything that you should adhere to more than anything out there with your lineups, is that game theory edge and making sure that you're not playing guys that are double to three times the ownership of all the other guys around them. Now, if you got like one, maybe two of those kind of players sneaking into your player pool, then so be it, right? Build around those high-owned sort of players. But the rest of your player pool, vast majority of that, in fact, should be these mid to lower-owned players that you're mixing in. So just keep that in mind before we really talk about anything here. Let me catch my breath. Let me get a sip of water over here. And we're going to talk about birdie or better percentage for the next 10 whole minutes here, because that is what I think is by far, it's not even close, the main thing you should be looking at for your process. And this is when it comes to actually building a player pool. Ownership, of course, we're going to incorporate on top of just looking at this birdie or better percentage. But these sort of players, the guys that have high birdie or better horsepower, that go out there and make a lot more birdies than their peers, are absolute gold on a slate like this, because bogeys you don't worry about, right? If it's a player that makes a shit ton of birdies, but also mixes in a lot of bogeys, when you have a teammate to back you up tomorrow, then you don't have to worry about that, right? Like if you're a Kurt Kitayama, for example, who hit like 3 water balls today, sunk that Morikawa group out there outside of the cut line, you don't have to worry about that when you have Kitayama, in his case, Morikawa going out there and backing you up out there as one of the most accurate drivers on the tour. So, you know, it changes your thought process a lot. And we're not really thinking about players that are consistent like we normally are out there on tour. We're more so looking for the guys that have those outlier performances. So let me get the sip of water. I've been delaying it here enough. And what we're going to do is we're going to try and find some of the high birdie percentage groups to go out there and target in our exposure. So right off the bat, we've got two players that are actually in this field in this top 5. So they've got Sepp Straka, who's with Bryce Garnett, and then we've got Cam Davis, who's alongside an Adam Svensson. So obviously we don't see Garnett up here in the top 5. We don't see Svensson up here either, but you know, it's worth noting that those two quote unquote studs are the ones that are leading their group for this year. Akshay Bhattia's group missed the cut. Same thing with Siwoo Kim and the Svensson Norgard group there. By the way, those two were paired together, Svensson Norgard. So that's why I was so high on them on a week like this. Unfortunately, did not make it through the cut line, so not going to get there that way. You have Jake Knapp. He's grouped up with Frankie Sapin III, who, by the way, Sapin III, you're not going to see on this sort of list because he hasn't had the best start here to 2025, but he's a really good putter and extremely long player off the tee. The kind of guy who's extremely aggressive, played well on the Korn Ferry Tour where they're playing a lot of easy resort style golf courses, which lends its hand to this high birdie percentage, high horsepower sort of players, because around those kind of golf courses on the Korn Ferry Tour, it takes like 25, sometimes even like 28 under par to go out there and win those kind of events. So that's kind of why I think Sapin, that Nap group over there at number 14, could be a group to keep an eye on. And we're not even just going to look, this is for the year, by the way. This is just 2025 stats that we're looking at here together. Over here in Bet the Number, we're going to look at just the last 36 rounds. And in fact, I think we're actually I'm going to do that right now, narrow it down to the last 24 rounds. So we can zoom in on that recent form just a little bit more over here on the Bet the Number side. But over here with this tab on the PGA Tour website, we're looking at full year stats. So this is probably closer to a 40 round sample size for a lot of players. Some even more than that. You can see some of them, right? It's like 170 rounds. Is that right? 170 birdies that they made. Total holes played over there on that right side, probably a lot more tournaments played than I probably expect for a lot of these kind of players. But a few other that stand out, you have Danny Walker here. He's in Ryan Gerard's group. I'm not exactly sure where Gerard's going to grade out. In fact, I guess we don't have to guess. Let's just check. Gerard's down there at 48. So that's 2 top 50 players that you have in that group right there. That's one that immediately stands out. You've got McIntyre down there at 44. Let's see where Dietrich is. So Dietrich is 80. So that's 2 top 80 players there together. Which, by the way, the average point is at about 88 on the tour. So anyone that is 88th or better is quote unquote better than average. Now, Dietrich just a little bit better than your average over there at number 80. But like you get 2 guys that are top 50, like that Gerard Walker group, and you could really be cooking out there with a combo. Now, who is it Springer with? Springer's with Lashley. I don't think Lashley is having himself a season. Yeah, in fact, he's number 181 out there on tour in that category. But if you go through these stats, whether it's over here on PGATour.com or over here on the Bet the Number stuff that we're going to look at here in a second, it gives you a really good idea of who the most aggressive and the guys that cash in on the most birdies are going to be. And you can see Bud Cauley here. He's with Kevin Tway. Kevin Tway doesn't have his tour card this year. So, right, he's not going to have full stats to go out there and break down. But you can go through this and use this as your first data point to go out there and build a player pool. And this is more of the recent form stuff that we have over here on this tab. So you got Rory McIlroy, obviously towards the top. There's Norgard again. You can tell why I played him this week. Unfortunately, didn't work out, as we've already mentioned. But there's Jake Knapp again. So that Knapp Sapin group, I really think is worth some extra attention. There's Bud Cauley. Kevin Tway, I guess, is going to be the big question mark there out there between those different kind of players. But guys that maybe weren't showing up before that you could consider going out there and using, and we got to make sure they're guys that are actually making the cut here, is like maybe a Davis Riley group, right? He's going alongside a Nick Hardy over there. They won this event before a few years ago. And I think that they're going to get some ownership just because they won this event as a pairing. But at T16, I don't think they're going to be mega chalk on a slate like this. And you've got Davis Riley making a whole lot of birdies. Now, we're not going to see Nick Hardy towards the top end of this list, but that's the kind of player that I'm personally adding to my watch list. The Haynes Springer Lashley group, we already talked about that. Kind of wish that Lashley had better form heading in. But if you go through this list, and there you got Aaron Rai making some birdies. Somebody like Sahith Theegala, he gets hot and cold with the putter. Hopefully he has a hot round, right? If you went out there and you used them in lineups for tomorrow, this is what I would be using for my process. And it's just like the weather, just like going out there and just playing guys that are, popping in the projections. It's just one part of the process. So, don't go too overboard. That is always my advice out here with these kind of things that we're pointing out. But it is a nice thing to go out there and use in your back pocket. And, just like you can use that as a positive out there in some players, you might want to look to the bottom of the list and potentially avoid some of these players because it is all about the kind of birdie percentage that you have. So just consider that out there with your process, because other than game theory, this weather edge that we talked about before, there's not a whole lot that we have out here in our process. So the last few things I want to talk about before we finish up with any questions that you have down there in chat would be, first off, the contest selection, and then also putting together a lineup or two. So let's start off with the contests that are available, which just like yesterday are not the best, right? Not going to sugarcoat it. It's exactly the same as what you had for round number 2. So your big $100 single entry, and I put big in quotes, is 111 entries. your big $333 contest. So this is the one that Robert took down in the chat, is $10K to first. So seemingly seems like a decent contest because it is only a 3-entry max. So this is something I should consider entering. I did not enter this contest over there for round 2, but I usually like entering $500 to $1,000 out there for a showdown slate. And, it'd be $999 to go out there and max enter this. So good on Robert for going out there and being able to pull that off. But outside of, some of these contests here are just terrible. Like the big quote unquote drive the green, again, put that in quotes, is only 2K out there to first place. Just like yesterday, same exact kind of prize structure across the board on all these contests. At least the GPPs are a little bit less top heavy than what we typically have out there. So if they're going to be the exact same, I'm not going to do the whole spiel again because I think you guys get the idea from what we said yesterday. Mostly single entry based for me. And I went with like the $100 single entry. I went with some of the smaller field stuff like the $12, small $5 single entry, that sort of thing. But instead of going with some of that kind of stuff, if I'm going to raise my stakes, which I've got to kind of gauge my confidence in my player pool before I go out there and do so. But if I really like 3 or 4 guys, heck, maybe even a core of like 6 to 8 players that I really like for tomorrow, I've started building my pool, but I haven't quite finalized it at this point. Then maybe I take, that pool of 8 to 10 guys I really like and put together 3 lineups with those 8 to 10 guys in this kind of a contest. So I have to see what I end up deciding to do out there with my exposure. Kind of siding towards the first one where it's those smaller single entries and then some lineups out there in the big $5 GPP. But we'll have to see because this kind of payout structure is super top heavy. I mean, it's a third to first place. That's really why I'm kind of siding towards what I did for today over going out there and max entering this kind of thing, is that it's a little bit unsustainable, right? It's great if you go out there and bink it like you had down there in chat. But if you don't bink it, then it's a little bit tougher to go out there and make it a more sustainable contest out there from day to day. So that's it for the contest selection segment. In terms of actually putting together lineups, a lot of it is the same as what we had for yesterday. But it's a different kind of focus. We were more so focusing on just ownership yesterday. We're going to have some birdie percentage. We're going to have some early tee times to go out there and try and mix in, to go out there and add on top of that. So I do want to see if they posted tee times yet. And it does look like we just got those. And it's exactly what we thought it would be. It is just 2 groups going off of one side of the golf course. So you don't have guys starting on hole 1 and over there on hole number 10, which is going to give us about a 4-hour spread in tee time. So your first one's going off at 8:50 Eastern, which is an hour back over there in Central. So that is 7:50 over there local time. And then your last one is over here at 12:45. So yeah, pretty much exactly that 4-hour spread that we were calling for. So, maybe a slight weather edge going back to this weather forecast from before. It is going to get a little firmer as the day goes on. I think that's where any sort of edge is going to come from. But the other part is that the groups towards the top are objectively some of the better groups in the field. Like Rory is going to be included in that second half. The Højgaard twins, there's a lot of your 8, 9K guys that made the cut right up there at the top end of the board. It's going to be warmer too, right? Which could actually help the players out there in that PM wave. So don't go all in out here on this sort of a weather edge, but these guys that are going off early could see better conditions for birdies. Like it's just going to be more receptive. You're going to be able to hit the ball closer to the hole. Now, is everyone going to go out there and take advantage? Of course not, right? Like especially like the Snedeker Reeve group, like they're old crusty veterans at this point. Like I don't know if they'd be my favorite target going off early. There's some groups down there that are kind of just lower level groups to begin with, but like a Phillips Thorbjornsen, I bet them this week. I obviously like them for a reason. They're the second group off. Like they're a no-brainer for me to go out there and play. The Danny Walker Gerard, right? We talked about them as both top 50 birdie makers this year. They go off in the third group off. Like they're going to be a no-brainer for me to go out there and mix in. Post and Mitchell, like that's a stud group up there in that 9-10K range, going off in your fourth group off. Like, some of these teams I could definitely see myself getting to. I might take a shot on some of these slapdick groups that you have down here as well. And, if I'm going to take a shot on a slapdick group, it is worth saying over here, it is going to be one of these early groups off because I'm not going to do it out there with those mid to later starters. There's just no point to go out there and do so. We don't have shots gained metrics to, tell us that somebody's been really striping his irons out here in a week like this. If we did, right, maybe I would have a real surprising slappy down towards the bottom you might want to consider. But it's really just going to be tee time based for me. So I can tell you, right, it's not going to be that Snedeker Reeve group that I go out there and use in that kind of scenario. maybe a Ramey Lauer. I got to say that one kind of catches my eye there. Who else? Maybe this, I'm not going to call Collie a slappy by any means. Yeah, maybe that Ramey Lauer group ends up getting its way into my player pool, but that's how I'd be using that to your advantage. Let's build a lineup or two together here. So let me refresh this. Let me see if they took out the groups that missed the cut. Looks like they have already. So good on DraftKings to be on top of that. I know they have it automated at this point, so I shouldn't be giving them too much credit, but good stuff, DK, out there making my life a little bit easier. Let's go out there and try and play the weather game a little bit, but show you guys kind of what you should be thinking about when putting together lineups. So I'm going to start with Mitchell Poston as my first man in. Again, one of those first four groups off, I think, is going to be an advantage. Let's throw in Echeverria Grazeman. I believe they were part of the fifth group off, just after some of the other groups that we were pointing off before. Let's throw in Phillips Thor Bjornsson. So we can start with three groups here that are in the first five groups off. Two of which, by the way, I bet for outrights this week. I bet Grazerman this week. I bet the Thor Bjornsson group this week as well. Obviously, not in the top five right now. They've got to get some work done to go out there and get towards the top. But what better on a best ball day to go out early when it's soft conditions? You can throw darts on every single hole. And by the way, the soft conditions matters on a day like this because when it's soft, you can just go after every single pin, right? There's no fear when you have two players to go out there and keep yourself from making bogeys. I love that for all three of these groups. And then this one up here with Mitchell and Poston, right? I believe that was a DGen's play of the week, right? You had for this golf tournament. So I love the vibes with those three. I think three just stud groups in general at this sort of golf tournament. And then for your last three players, this is where you're getting your leverage, because these three groups, even though I don't think they're going to be chalk for tomorrow, they are starting towards the quote unquote bottom of the board over there at T25, right? The guys are just hardly made the cut over there. They're only starting 7 shots back. That is just wild to me over here on this sort of format. But these sort of teams over here are not going to be your 25, like 30 percenters. 40 percenters like you have with the Rory Shane Lowry group. Rather, they're going to be like your average owned players over there in that kind of range. They'll get some steam because they're going off early, right? People watching this live stream, some of them are more likely to go out there and use these sort of players. People that play that weather edge, right, go after the morning guys in general, are also going to go out there and get to these sort of players. But a lot of your casuals and even more of your public out there that want to go out there and play the quote unquote informed players are going to flock towards the guys at the top. And just remember that this is a different sort of week out here in Tour. It is almost completely random when it comes to the best ball, because you could have two players that make, let's say, 14 birdies tomorrow. And between them, right, let's say it's like 8 for one and then 6 for the other. Let's say that the guy that makes 6, all make his 6 on holes where the other guy made birdie. They may only shoot something like -8 on the day or something like that because of the way that their birdies coincide. So there's a lot of luck when it comes to this format that people don't talk about, or I guess just maybe don't understand when it comes to trying to handicap it. And that's why I'm such a big proponent of, like, down here in the 6 and 7K range, of really trying to get different. So, the other added component of that is that by taking some lower owned players here, it's also going to get us part of that weather edge. So I don't even want to call like Gerard Walker low owns, because I think people are going to play that weather edge a bit and then get to him in some lineups. But compared to, let's say, this Bridgman Phillips group that I think might be double the ownership there, or at least like 5 to 7% higher owned, right? He's a pivot when you make that sort of comparison. So let's throw those two into there. We already talked about the fact that they're aggressive players to begin with. Let's throw in that Ramey Lauer group just because I know we mentioned them a little bit earlier. And then you have $7,600 remaining. Obviously, you can go out there and pick your last guy there. We can't go through that together here on stream because DraftKings frowns upon that. But as long as you're not taking mega chalk for your last man in, you're going to be totally fine. And even if you wanted to take somebody that, let's say, was like average ownership for your last man in here, if you were leaving $200 to $300 on the table, like, I think that's acceptable. Like, in theory, a Riley Hardy as a last man in, if you were kind of just thinking about a few guys that you could think through, you could use them, even though they are a little bit over 10% ownership out there in my projections, because you're leaving, if you got to that sort of player, $300 on the table. For example, that Springer Lashley group that, Springer making a whole lot of birdies this year, also decent form with those two players. Like, if you got to them, you could probably even use them at that kind of ownership, which will probably be over 15% over there in my projections, which, by the way, my projections is different than what they have over there on the SHIPIT Nation website. So I can't completely speak to what they're going to have with their website, but I'm assuming they're probably also going to have relatively high ownership there. They were chalk for main slate. They played well to this point of the week. So that's why I think that they're going to be popular for tomorrow. even if you used them in your lineup to round it off here, because you're leaving that 200, you might get away with that over there in the big $5 or $25. Now, if you're in some of the smaller GPPs, even like a single entry sort of contest, you probably don't have to worry about the ownership nearly as much. So, for example, like we took a super grimy play right over there with Ramey Lauer. Like it almost made me laugh when I went out there and clicked it, because I'm like, oh boy, like why are we doing this to ourselves? You don't necessarily have to make that kind of pivot out there in a single entry or a smaller GPP, because you're not trying to beat 10 to 15,000 other people. So, for example, maybe you still take a guy who's still average to below average ownership here with the Collie Tway group, but a group that projects a little bit better on paper. And, if you're a last man in, maybe you don't have to get as crazy with leaving a whole bunch of salary on the table. And if you use the Riley Harley group again, like you probably get away with that over there in that sort of contest. So it's always considering what the lineup is being built for, right? Your sort of process for building lineups tomorrow should not be the same for the big $5 or $25 GPPs as what you're doing over there for your cash lineups or over there in your $100 single entry. So just be thinking about that when you have, and to make it real easy for you guys, when you have to beat more people, you need to have more lower owned guys in your lineups, because when you have to go out there and beat, let's say like 10,000 entries, you've got to have 2-3 guys in your lineup that are really moving you up those leaderboards when they hit. It's nice to have a 30%er when they go out there and score 60 DraftKings points tomorrow. Likely going to have to get towards like 80, 90 fantasy points to have that sort of day. It's nice to have a 30%er when they do that, but you're sharing them with 30% of the field, right? You still have to beat the 30% of the field with your other 5 spots. It's much, much better. And, you're going to win and lose the day on these sort of players that are like 1-2% owned that go out there and do that. So that's why we talk about the ownership so much, especially out there in those larger contests, because, especially when you get over 1,000 entries that you're playing against, it's tough to go out there and bank a top 5 or a win there. So play for it, play to go out there and beat the rest of the field, because this is a team format. We really only know so much. And I mean, at this point, right, all we were looking at is birdie stats, right? We're looking at some stuff over here and bet the number. That's all we've got to work with, right? And that's what everyone else has to work with out there. Play the game and play the ownership game against them. So I'll see if there's any last second questions down there in chat. If not, we're going to hop on out of here, but go ahead, smash that like button if you guys haven't already. I hope to see you guys out there towards the top of some of those GPPs. And also make sure you subscribe so you guys don't miss the live stream out there tomorrow. So for round 4, we'll be doing the same exact thing when we have the placement points in play for Sunday, and we'll be going back to alt shot for that. So, a whole other can of worms opened up over there with the placement points in play, but we'll talk through that over there tomorrow night. So subscribe so you guys don't miss that when it's dropping. And of course, for all the prop and betting stuff, make sure to check out my Patreon page for all of that. I'm not quite sure we're going to be doing content on the betting stream side over there for that this weekend, just because I don't think there's massive demand when it comes to props on that side. But you guys know I'm always still playing them and posting them for my people. So make sure to check that out over there, as well as all the projections that I'm doing. Where we leave off. You're saying it's going to be 90 degrees tomorrow. You say that'll be a bigger factor, not the wind. I agree with that. And I think that's what we said before, Tim. So I don't think that's a big hot take. He said, what a shot from Bryson on the last hole. Yeah, so I'm not watching myself, Brian, but I'm not sure if you saw him starting through his first 4 holes. I believe he was -4, -5 through his first 4. Now it's easy. The first 3 were drivable out there for Bryson, but that golf course, I've got to say, man, I miss it. I know we played it for the WGCs back in the day, but especially with the equipment that they have now, it's been a 5-6 year break since we played there over there in Mexico City. I mean, Bryson hit drives today at 410 yards, which, I mean, you never see unless you're dealing with a massive downslope like over at Kapalua. This is with flat drives, right? This isn't with like a massive rollout. Bryson was carrying drives like 390 today. So that's why I'm stoked for the live over the weekend. I'll probably even play some showdown lineups over for that as well. So we'll be chopping that up over there in my Discord page. Anyone that's doing the live stuff, feel free to hit me up because I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I think you want to target bombers over there for live. I know this isn't the live live stream, but I guess I'll give my 2 cents on it. Like the par 4s are drivable. Like you're going to say like, oh, 440, this isn't drivable. They are. Like 440, you had Harold Varner III. Anyone that watched him before he went over to live knows that he wasn't a long player. He wasn't a short player, but he's like an average distance guy out there in tour. He had a drive today 407, I believe is what it was. Either way, it was like a 450-yard hole. He had 60 yards in, and he had missed to the long side, like way to the distance to the side, and only had 60 yards in. So it's a bomber's paradise, I'd say, over there at Chipotle. I'm not even going to try and say the name, the Mexico City golf course. And yeah, he said 388-yard drive to 20 feet. It's that sort of golf course, man. So I'm going to enjoy that golf. I'm going to enjoy the golf over here for the Zurich Classic as well. But best of luck with all the exposure that you guys are getting to. Make sure to check out the SHIPIT Nation for all of their projections, including the stone out there tonight. And of course, my page for all the stuff that I'm doing. But that's all I've got over here for today. Best of luck out there. And see you guys out there for the round 4 live stream tomorrow night.